Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CBI at 10. We put on this special session because we have a chance to talk about the vaccines and what happens next in the response to the pandemic. And we're really grateful to Ben Osborne, who is the Managing Director of Pfizer in the UK, and to Devi Sridhar, who is the Chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh. Between the two of you, it feels as though you have 2021 in your hands, Ben, in terms of understanding vaccines. And Devi, I can't help feeling you've become the person that the country goes to answer the question, what happens next? So we really appreciate you making the time. There is a slight awkwardness, I have to confess, this morning in hosting a conversation about the vaccine when there's a kind of another show going on in a different tent. And so if you don't mind, we're just going to do 5 minutes at the top, Ben and Devi, with Tony, before Tony tees up the conversation about business and the vaccine, just to do, playing in a different cinema, Brexit. And so, Tony, do you want to just give a read on what you make of what's happened overnight and what the CBI is hearing about the possibilities of deal or no deal?
Sure. Well, look, like you, I've been looking forward all week to this discussion, but there was a dinner party in Brussels last night, which merits some attention. Look, you've all read the news. I'm not sure I can give you any news. All I would say is this, deals are done by people getting to yes. It's always very easy to get to know. When you're in a deal, very easy to get to know. And by the way, anyone that's negotiated deals will know that when you get to things like breaches or penalty clauses or terminations, that's always the bit that freaks everybody out. And what I can say is that talking to some government sources, I think they were genuinely surprised by some of the goalposts being moved when it comes to divergence. And let's be clear, questions of sovereignty are for politicians. They're not for business people. We can't, resolve those questions. But what we can say is we have to get to yes. The difference between deal and no deal is a big deal. We've just put out our CBI economic forecasts. We think even with the deal and government doing everything they can to stimulate the economy, you're still struggling to get back to normal for another couple of years without a deal, 1%, maybe 2%. Governor of the Bank of England says this recurring problem of no deal makes it a bigger economic than COVID. But to be a bit more practical for you, our members, if you're in the automotive sector, 10% tariffs on cars, right? That puts the average cost of a car up by £2,800. If you're a dairy farmer in Northern Ireland, right, you're about to get tariffs of about 30, 40% when your margin's 3%. This is real money. So, look, I've always said that there was a landing zone here, and it's around dispute resolution mechanisms. And you have to believe that if there is a will, there is a way. There's enough variability and resolution here. And I think that's why business people from the outside in are still hopeful of a deal, but not great news overnight. It's very important. And I think this morning privately, I've been making that position pretty clear to those in the know. Just a reminder for everybody, and then let's get on to vaccines. But just to remind everybody, our main objectives, the things we're really pushing for. The first thing is guidance. So what's really punishing about all of this is how long it's taking, how close we're getting, how close to the wire it's getting. So deal or no deal, people need to plan. And so the first thing we're really saying to government is guidance is everything. If it's a deal, let's turn that from text into guidance. If it's no deal, let's be clear about guidance. The second thing that we're pushing for is all about smoothing that cliff edge. So whether or not, even if it's in a deal scenario, it's about rules of origin or relabeling, or if it's in a no deal scenario, it's about aviation or it's about haulage or it's about data adequacy in both scenarios, we need to smooth that cliff edge. And I would just say there's little signs of optimism in the last 24 hours, whether it be a little bit of breakthrough on Northern Ireland, although still not enough detail, or some soundings from the Europeans around, sorting out aviation and haulage. What I really hope is that we just avoid cliff edge. And we've got the second meeting of the next meeting, of the Michael Gove task force today. It's going to be focused on construction, infrastructure, and housing. And again, looking to work with government to make sure if it's ports issues like yesterday, if it's IT systems, if it's haulage permits, whatever it might be, We're really working with government like we've worked with them in COVID, in doing instant problem solving and resolution. So that's probably both the big picture and the practical picture on Brexit, James.
And Tony, just one thing. So I will take from that a sort of, your public statement on where you want things to end up in terms of a deal, privately speaking to people in government. For CBI members who are perhaps beginning to think, well, maybe there really is not going to be a deal, and preparations for no deal, is the CBI support on that really similar, regardless of whether there's a deal or not? Just what kind of sort of practical advice is going to come from the CBI in the next, I suppose, two and a half that event?
Well, look, above all, what we're trying to do is, we can't determine answers, we can only understand them. We will be pushing government for clarity of guidance. It's what we're using the Michael Gove task force for, and we've got a little bit more back this week from last week's meeting on professional services. Our pledge is that we will be giving members loads of information. We will run a service over Christmas to make sure that every day you can understand exactly what's going on. You don't have to rely on reading the papers. You can rely on the CBI to help you through that stuff. I think we've got a webinar coming next week where we can go into some of this stuff in detail. So our pledge is to keep you as informed as we can. But look, I'm sure you'll understand that we can't be any faster than the politicians in making progress. But I think we're pushing government really to be really pragmatic about guidance. Guidance is everything, and we will help you interrogate it.
Okay, well, Tony, thank you for that. And obviously, given the timeline and given Sunday now feels like the deadline, we're here at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. We'll have the chance to really begin to interpret what's happened. Should we come to vaccines then? We pitched this conversation really as thinking about what businesses need to know, what they need to decide, what they need to do. I don't know, Tony, before I sort of dig in with Ben and Debbie, do you want to just share what you're hearing from business, how you think business should be approaching it?
Yeah, sure. Look, first of all, I'm delighted to have Ben and Debbie here. Debbie is a friend of the CBI. She's spoken at our annual conference. And I personally think, although she'll accuse me of saying this to all the experts, she's been the best expert on telly for the last 9 months. Ben is a CBI member. He's a CBI President's Committee member as well. And Ben, I hate to sound like your mother, but we're all really proud of you. And we're all really proud of all your teams. I mean it. I mean, you have given the nation a boost, and it feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel. And for businesses, that means hopefully, an opening up of the economy. I noticed Matt Hancock was in tears, I think. And by the way, a big shout out for all of them. And I think, if you've been working in the NHS and you've been managing the crisis, you just must be hugely inspired at the fact that vaccine is on the way. I'm convinced, by the way, that you set up Maggie Keenan to go first, because if you'd gone first with William Shakespeare, the world wouldn't have believed it. They would have assumed we were having a laugh. But it was so moving to see those vaccinations yesterday. Look, we sort of sat down yesterday and we've spoken to some members around the country, and we think there's probably a few questions that are probably front of mind for businesses, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but I'm sure, James, you'll want to hear a bit more about the vaccine itself. But probably 4 for me. The first one is, should companies be doing employee engagement and awareness about the merits of vaccination, and what should they be doing? So any thoughts you have on that? Secondly, the interplay with testing. We've always said we need to live with the virus before we can live without it. I think I'm right in saying that at this stage, because we don't know if the vaccine stops spreading, that even if I'm vaccinated, I still have to self-isolate if I get the buzz, right? So what is the interplay between testing and vaccination? Probably on everybody's mind is, can you just help me with timeframes? I want to plan for my business next year. Which quarter should I be thinking about opening up an opportunity? Any light you can shed on that? And then I guess, can business help with the vaccine? Business is incredibly keen to help on testing. It will be incredibly keen to help on the vaccine. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do to help on that. It's probably controlled by the NHS. But those, James, were some of the questions that came up yesterday when we talked to some members and some of the teams about where we are. But looking forward to hearing from the panel.
Tony, thank you. But Ben, can I ask you, even before you get into Tony's kind of business engagement questions, just help us right at the beginning. It's great to hear directly from you. Just what is the vaccine? What does it do? How does it work? What can it do for us and what can't it do? Just so we can begin to get our heads around that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that first thing to say is we are one of many vaccine programs that are in development. We're delighted that we have got across the line right now. We've got the authorization for the MHRA. We're going to need multiple vaccines ultimately, though. There are different technologies out there. I'll avoid getting into all of the detailed science around the different platforms. We are what's known as an mRNA vaccine. Essentially, we through our vaccination, 2 jabs over 21 days. It's a genetic signal that teaches the body how to react and how to essentially prime the immune system should it then come into contact with COVID-19 in the future. We've shown through our phase 3 clinical studies involving nearly 44,000 patients an efficacy of 95%, which is hugely significant, and really importantly that was in a very diverse population in terms of age, race, ethnicity, and on a global basis.
And Ben, can I just understand one thing? If you've had the vaccine, you can't, you're 95% unlikely to catch COVID, but you can still transmit it. Is that right? Can you just explain why that's the case?
Yeah, so right now there are a number of questions, but one of the key questions we don't know is does vaccination actually prevent transmission, so asymptomatic transmission? We know that with the data that's come out that you significantly reduce severe COVID and therefore the resultant impact on the NHS, hospitalisation and death. What we don't know right now, although there is a scientific hypothesis that we will only know with time and the surveillance programs that we have in the UK, that Devi is an expert in, that whether we ultimately do reduce the transmission and spread of this disease asymptomatically. And I think that then speaks to Tony's point around testing and the interplay between testing of our population and vaccination of our population through the year ahead.
And Ben, do you want to just touch on, the flip of Tony's point about we're all so proud, is there also a bunch of people who are also a little worried that the vaccine was developed at such speed that are there issues that we need to be concerned about given the pace at which it was developed?
Yeah, so the vaccine
confidence and trust.
Vaccine confidence and trust is going to be absolutely key. So right now, I guess there are a number of points to reinforce. Safety is absolutely at the forefront of every single development program that you see, and certainly from a Pfizer-BioNTech perspective. All of the clinical trials are independently assessed, monitored and measured as you go through the development process. But I think the piece that should give everyone confidence is that final step of the process, which is the independent and rigorous assessment of our data from an efficacy, safety and manufacturing consistency point of view by the UK regulator, the MHRA. And the easiest way to describe it is they have not reduced any threshold. They have not lowered the need for any particular data set. What they've essentially done is a rolling review of the data. Typically what a company would do would be, if you think of it as a book, you would write each individual chapter, you would go back through that, you then ultimately package it up after a period of time, leather bound, and it gets submitted. That's the normal, easy way to think of vaccine assessment by the regulator. What we've done in this case is, as we've written each chapter, so as data has become available on the efficacy, the safety, the chemistry of the product, we've submitted it to the regulator in real time. So they've actually been assessing this since the summer. What they've then done, as I think June Rain of the MHRA described, is that final sprint is when we had the final efficacy and safety data. They've been able to assess that over the last couple of weeks to result in this authorization. So it's that independence and integrity of the regulator that is critical here.
So your point is, if I understand it right, Ben, we should just understand the MHRA process of having happened concurrently rather than at the end of the development process. And in the sense, it's the same oversight.
Absolutely. You know, we recognised, and I know the MHRA recognised, this and any vaccine that comes through is going to be the most scrutinised ever. This is not a moment that anybody is going to be cutting any corner.
I mean, one of the things I should have said at the beginning is that the real strength of these CBI at 10 sessions and all the way through COVID, we did one together, Ben, didn't we, at the beginning of, in May, is actually hearing from businesses and sort of sharing their interests or concerns. And so I hope people will put their questions and points of view. We've already had a few in, and I'm going to put some to you in a moment, Ben. But I want to make sure we get to sort of that Tony's list of employee engagement, testing, business planning, and help. Can we just get some context, Evie, though? The next 6 months, what's your read on what people should be expecting? Because it's not kind of vaccination and with one leap you're free, is it?
No, I mean, the first thing to say, though, is the vaccine is really exciting, not just the Pfizer one, but, you know, the AstraZeneca one that hopefully there'll be approval for soon, and the Moderna one that looks excellent. And the UK is invested in 7 different vaccines. So those who are watching, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a handout. I put together just a brief PowerPoint that goes through what has the UK invested in, how does it compare to other countries, and the kind of key aspects to know about each of these vaccines, the UK investment, as well as the rollout, and then some of the conditions under which they need to be stored and deployed under. So hopefully that's helpful. But I guess coming back to your point, the vaccine currently is exciting because it will save people from dying who might be infected in the coming weeks. And right now, the UK is facing hundreds of deaths a day. And so I think that's the real positive news on it. The less positive news is it doesn't mean we can just lift all restrictions, because we still need to suppress the virus and keep numbers low. And in terms of how this evolves, either we need to reach some kind of herd immunity threshold where enough of the population is vaccinated, and that looks to be between 80 to 90% of the population, so a large percentage. There have been suggestions of just vaccinating over 50s and leaving people under 50 to just kind of naturally acquire the infection. But I think the problem there is around long COVID and the morbidity associated, as well as the hospitalization rate, which meant you're not really going to you might save people from dying, but you still need to provide them care in hospitals, whether it's oxygen or supportive care. So just to say, it's not an easy silver bullet solution right now to just lifting all restrictions. But I think the combination, and this is where there's hope for me from March, is mass testing is coming online, rapid antigen tests, results within 15 minutes, really cheap, you know, a couple of pounds each. Imperfect, because you could be incubating the virus, not so great at catching asymptomatic infections, but will take us much further. So for example, university students are now being tested with these. If they have 2 negative tests several days apart, it's much safer than what we did at the start, which was not testing at all. And so I think mass testing, getting better at isolation. I think one thing that European countries as a whole have missed is that people have to isolate, and 14 days is a huge ask, especially if you're taking a financial hit for that. So how do we isolate people better, emotionally, financially, even practically with groceries or whatever they need for that time, as well as summer. I think this virus sort of spreads in indoor, crowded, you know, unventilated conditions, which is where we all are in winter. So I think in the summer, there's like a chance to really hammer the virus really low, use the vaccine, look at the Pfizer vaccine, which I think is great for the over 50s because it's been trialed in those groups. The AstraZeneca one, there are more doses of, but it hasn't been trialed in the over 50s, so it's probably going to be one using under 50s at the start, and then really work towards protecting and getting in place for next winter. And the final thing I'll say is I think we're going to have a divide between richer countries, which are going to find light next summer, like all of us are going to feel like we're through the worst, and poorer countries, which are going to struggle with this for years. We already have that divide in global health, but I think this is going to accentuate it. So those who have global businesses, you are probably going to see an increased divide between, you know, your Germany, the UK, France, you know, United States, who are going to be able to purchase vaccines, deploy them, get the testing, get the technologies, and then other countries, and especially fragile states where the situation probably will be dire for a couple of years.
Debbie, can I just pick up on one thing that you said, which I think is really on the minds of pretty much every business, I mean, including mine, I have to say, testing. So it feels as though we've crossed on the stairs a little between testing and vaccines. We were really confident in testing, we were really unsure of vaccines. Suddenly we've got a lot of hope in vaccines, and there's, I think confidence in testing has really been shaken by the rates on these lateral flow tests begin to be questions even about the efficacy of some of those PCR tests. There's been these recurrent questions about antigen tests. Can you just give us a sense of which tests you think are reliable and how businesses should begin to bank or not bank on the use of those tests?
I mean, the first thing to say is no test is perfect. And I do wonder sometimes if we spent too long debating like false positives, which has been a worry when you use these tests on kind of mass population basis, instead of actually false negatives, which in some way are more worrying because people then might resume normal behavior. But you'll find all kind of different views among experts. I'm really enthusiastic about mass testing because it's one of our few tools. And if we look at, for example, Slovakia, this is a country that didn't want to go into lockdown, so they tested over the course of a weekend, basically their whole adult and teenage population using the military. So 3 million people. They found, I think it was 30,000 people who were positive, put them into isolation, did it again a few days later, and they've managed to stay out of lockdown and bring their numbers low. The problem is how can you sustain that? Can you really test your whole population every week, twice a week? How do you actually use testing towards a broader strategy, whether it's buying time for the vaccine, whether it's really trying to get your numbers low and protecting it through border restrictions and concentrating your testing at airports and at ports. Liverpool is interesting because one of the issues there when they did mass testing was uptake was very low. And I can understand it because if you feel fine, you don't really want to be tested because if you end up being positive, then you have to isolate. And so there's a penalty associating with testing if you feel fine. You only want to, getting tested is in some way an act of goodwill. You're doing it for others because you already have the virus if you have it. And if you're feeling fine, why would you get tested? And so one of the things that Slovakia did that was different is Liverpool was voluntary, you'd come forward, but what they did there is that everyone was in lockdown, like under restrictions, but if you wanted to be lifted from restrictions as a household, you had to be tested. So the incentive was to get tested. Otherwise, they assumed you were positive, and if you didn't get tested, you were assumed to be positive. So I think there are ways that we could use testing, but I think for companies, this is one of the few ways. It has to be done multiple times, though. That's one of the challenges.
Okay, and Devi, how worried are you on the lateral flow false negatives?
Well, it is worrying, both in terms of you could be asymptomatic and therefore maybe have a lower viral load, and therefore it doesn't pick you up, even though you're shedding virus. And also the incubation period, which is really tricky about this virus, meaning you could test negative on day 1, test negative on day 8 even, and then by day 10 be positive, which means that you can't just test and say I'm negative and I'm fine. So this is one of the worries now with care homes where rapid tests are being used, that you don't want to miss those. But on the flip side, I think more and more research is showing that most people are infectious in the first period, which is like the first 5 days, the first 8 days. And so it's harm mitigation. It's saying, well, at least we can catch 80% of cases or 90% of cases. And then if we can keep the rest of them really low, then you can use your testing and tracing systems and other kind of measures. But I think, and this is kind of harsh news, I think restrictions are going to be in place for a long time around large events. So conferences, businesses might be thinking about international travel, large concerts, big parties, because just having testing is not going to let you test people and let them into that kind of event because you can end up having too many people infected. So I think businesses need to plan with restrictions being in place, lighter restrictions than what we have now. So probably more like what East Asia has. They have some restrictions in place compared to like the harsher restrictions we have now.
And sorry, Debbie, what is a long time?
So my hope is that by next summer, we could have restrictions as similar as in East Asia. So most people are moving around, but probably face coverings are still in place and still, testing and tracing is going to be in place. I mean, who knows, but I think by next winter, my hope is that people would have a more normal Christmas, I guess, than what we have now. People could actually gather. We'd have.
But even if you're in the conference business or the wedding business, even next summer, that might be constrained.
It depends how fast the vaccines roll out and if they actually stop transmission. So if the vaccines stop transmission, that's pretty remarkable. And then you can just roll it out. And the UK has acquired, you can look at the slides I've attached, but I mean, they have access to 355 million doses of 7 different candidates. So enough for the population many times over. So I think once we have that, and does it stop transmission, then actually you could just roll it out to the population, and maybe by next summer or the early fall, low risk groups like myself would actually have access to it. Children are the other difficult one here, because I don't think, Ben can come in on children, but I don't think the vaccines have been trialed in children. And so that's one of the groups you'd have to consider. Do you start trials in children to make sure it's safe and effective? I don't think you can just let the virus go through the child population because of the inflammatory condition that children have. It's rare, but even something that's rare, like in the United States, over 1,000 kids hospitalized, and it is quite a serious condition for children. So I think that's probably the next stage of the planning, was if it stops transmission, then how do we actually then bring it into younger age groups and to children as well?
Okay, Debbie, thank you. Ben, can I come back and actually ask you just to take the points that Tony made at the top around employee engagement and a bit of business planning? What do you think, if you're running a business that's not Pfizer, you should be saying to employees about expectations on vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a number of elements here. I think, as Debbie's just described, to roll the vaccine program out through the NHS, it is going to take time, and it's going to need multiple vaccines. We hope that by April next year, my understanding is that we will have reached the most vulnerable in our society, but that is going to be dependent on multiple vaccines and everybody coming forward when their turn in the queue arrives. So I think that's one dependent. The other piece then, and I think this is where business really does play a role, is in recognizing that some of that hesitancy is around distrust in business, distrust in, unfortunately, a company like mine, misinformation, some of the emotional angles, and social media. Now, we can all play a part in that, and I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are providing our employees, whether we're in the life science sector, hospitality, transport, or others, with facts about vaccination. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, after provision of clean water, vaccination is the single biggest public health intervention you can make. It's the most effective thing you can do. That one fact alone, we all need to understand, because many people in business, their elderly relatives, their mothers, their fathers, their neighbors will be getting called up in the weeks and months ahead, and they will rightly be asking questions. And I think it falls on all of us to help give them the facts, the figures, the confidence that they should be then engaging with the NHS rollout program.
And Ben, what would you like companies to do? I'm struck by what Debbie was saying about the Slovakia example, and obviously when public health systems or when societies lean in behind a health intervention, it makes a real difference. And companies will be asking themselves, should I require my employees to be vaccinated? You've heard airlines begin to suggest that they may want that if you're going to fly. What's your advice to businesses wondering whether or not that's an expectation they should have, and whether they should weigh in on vaccine hesitancy in that way?
Yeah, so I don't think it's right for me to sit here, or indeed for anyone to be necessarily mandating vaccination. I mean, there are a wide range of views on that, and it clearly polarizes opinion. And I think you get into some much bigger societal conversations and debates than perhaps business should be engaging in some of the moral, social dilemmas then associated with that. So for me, it comes down to making sure that you are providing, as part of your wider health and wellness responsibilities as a business, the appropriate facts, vaccination, and support to your employees around vaccination. And let's not forget, we're not just talking here, or we shouldn't just be talking about a COVID vaccine. Actually, we would all benefit from taking the flu jab, for instance. There are other vaccinations that employees could support their staff and teams with. So my organization, we don't produce or manufacture a flu jab, but we have enabled all of our employees to essentially, through their local high street pharmacy, to go and get a flu jab. That is part of supporting, I think, the wider return back to normality that we all aspire to, because alongside COVID, the NHS, of course, is trying to deal with the annual flu season as well.
Ben, thanks. Debbie, can I just come to you? While Ben was talking, there are a number of questions I should warn you, there's been a bit of these meetings on the CBI which have been like group therapy through the course of the year. This one is in danger of being something even worse, which is a group visit to the doctor, because a number of people are asking questions like, why is it that this virus doesn't seem to wane like other flu vaccine, like other flu viruses? Andrew Scrutin has asked that question, or maybe Gordon who's asked that question, and then likewise actually asking a similar question, which is, do you expect, Evie, that given that the flu virus or this COVID virus doesn't wane, that we're going to be in for, like flu jabs, regular COVID vaccines? It's going to be something we're going to have to continue to keep taking. What's your read on that, Evie?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it comes back to how long does immunity last, which we don't fully understand yet. I mean, the good news, I think, so far about natural immunity is it looks like, while antibodies fade between 12 to 14 weeks, that T-cell immunity lasts for at least 6 months. And so I think, Ben would know better, but I mean, my sense is we would hope a vaccine would last at least a year. And if it lasts a year, then it would become like a seasonal vaccination program. I mean, the other worry is, of course, if the virus mutates significantly into a different strain, would you need to have a new strain every year, like we have a different flu vaccine every year? And I think, at least from a public health perspective, this is why one of the areas I've been trying to push is looking at the way animals are kept. Like maybe you might have followed in Denmark, that there was a new strain that had gone into minks and then had mutated and come back, and that there was worry that that strain wouldn't actually, the vaccine wouldn't be as effective against it. So that's one of the worries, as well as trying to make sure that we keep any mutations to a minimum and trying to reduce any contact that this virus can have to jump to animal populations and come back and mutate along the way.
And forgive me, the implication of what you're saying, Devi, is that we should plan for that possibility, both for mutation and for the waning of the vaccine at the end of a period of, let's say, 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, coronaviruses are notorious for short immunity. I mean, some people are hoping that this, SARS-CoV-2 the strain will predominate, which is like our common cold, so it becomes more innocuous over time, like a seasonal infection. But it still shows no sign of that. And the two things that keep getting countries about this and why we underestimate it is the hospitalization rate, which means your health services come under strain. And so as long as this virus will put pressure on your health services in winter, then we will have to put in place restrictions to suppress it. I mean, it's that simple. And the other thing is the long COVID, the morbidity. And that's something to watch again with these vaccines. Do they also prevent the chronic illness? Because one of the big differences with this virus that we've seen compared to, let's say, one of the common cold viruses is that young people can get chronically ill for months from it. And we don't understand, is that like an autoimmune condition being triggered? Is this dead virus that's, causing, we don't understand it fully. And I think that's going to obviously change in the coming months once we know more how we deal with this virus as well.
So, Tony, can I come back to you? Because forgive me, I'm always worried when I listen to people like you, Devi, and Ben. You're so across the detail of this that things that are obvious to you can be kind of shocking to someone who's outside it, like me. And just listening to you, the thought that this is an intervention in our national health care that is not going to be with one vaccine, but might be annual vaccines, and that we've had a problem with optimism bias throughout 2020, and if there's a risk of mutation, we need to be preparing for that. All of that, Tony, would suggest to me that we're going to be thinking about an ongoing response to COVID-19 that may last not just 2020-21, but for the coming years. And I just wondered how you talk about business planning and also the CBI's role thinking about business and government. What your response is to that?
Yeah, well, look, I'm digesting it as I hear it. Ben and I had a conversation yesterday. We were having a catch up, and we were talking about something you alluded to, which is the role of business in the health of the nation. And actually, companies have been getting increasingly into notions of wellness. Most of it's been focused around mental health.
Yeah.
But I think you add this to the list, right? I mean, if Devi is right, and we are now going to be in a world of annual or seasonal vaccination, and it's an essential part of health, the great strength of business is, we are by definition, a huge distribution network, and we are in huge daily communication with millions of people, and businesses you know, in the way that at the moment businesses, I think, are at the front line of the mental health crisis that's arisen from the virus. I think businesses will absolutely take on the mantle of trying to be at the forefront of a sort of more prolonged management of COVID-19, if that's what's required. And I think they will factor it into wellness. And therefore, this idea that we're going to have to communicate trust and confidence and facts about this vaccine, maybe the truth is, just listening to Ben and Debbie, that actually we're going to think much more proactively as businesses about our role in physical and mental health for employees going forward. And I personally think what we've seen this year from business leaders will be all too ready, proud and happy to play that role with employees. It's good for business and it's good for society.
And can I just ask Ben on that? You know, there's also a problem, which is businesses like eager to help. You know, that it's like sort of that over-eager neighbour. It's like, no, it's fine, we've got this. Is there anything that business can do, picking up on Tony's point, that does help in either on the information side or on the distribution side with the vaccine in the next, let's say, 3 months?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been inundated with requests, which is great, and we really appreciate those. I think what we all need to understand is actually it is the responsibility now of the NHS to actually make sure that we get this vaccine to those in our society that need it as quickly as possible. And actually, I mean, I've been up close to this, you know, every day working with the leads in the NHS to enable this. They are in really good shape. They have a very clear plan that will scale up from where we find ourselves this week through into 2021. And I think actually they don't need others sort of coming in to try and, you know, offer their support and what have you there, because that's their job. They know exactly what they're doing there. From an equity point of view, it's really important as well. What we as an organization, I think, and others don't want is to be supplying our vaccine to individuals who are not at risk of COVID to the same extent as perhaps, you know, my 78-year-old mother, for instance. So we need to make sure that the distribution is through the NHS. What we all can do, though, is coming back to that confidence and information point. So making sure that regardless of the size of your business, you are providing your staff, your colleagues, with the right facts and figures, you know, around the impact of vaccination per se, and enabling that.
Just one thing, Ben, what about side effects and whether or not businesses, as they see more of their employees having the vaccine, should be expecting those employees to take the afternoon, the day off, a couple of days off? What should people expect in terms of side effects?
So I think I'm going to take a step back. I think we all need to make sure that we are giving our colleagues the time to actually go to get a vaccine. You know, I don't want anybody having to book half a day's holiday or book hours off to go and get the vaccine. This is going to be the thing that gets us out of this this crisis. I'm not going to get into all the detail of side effects around vaccinations. Again, Debbie's probably more of an expert here. What I would say, though, very clearly is the side effects associated with vaccinations broadly, and certainly with what we're seeing of COVID-19 vaccines, is they are extremely mild and they are very short term. They are typically minor headache, flu-like symptoms, and we wouldn't have been in a position actually for the MHRA to authorize our vaccine and hopefully subsequent others unless they are assured of that side effect profile. So I don't think that that's a concern for business, honestly.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Dave, I just wanted to give you the last word, if I might. There was a question that came in right at the top from Guy Benson, which was around when we're actually going to get the data that shows the extent to which or even whether the vaccine is working, and the risk that in the short term, you know, expectations around the vaccine change behavior and it leads to a spike in infections. So do you want to, if you like, just give us our marching orders for the next 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, well, I've been, you know, very open that we're entering a really risky period, and the vaccine will not change what happens in the next 8 weeks. It'll change what happens in the next, I would say, 4 to 6 months. And I would agree with everything Ben said about, the vaccines and the side effects and it being safe. I mean, it's been approved now by Canada. It looks like the US is going to move today or tomorrow as well for approval. And so to have multiple governments with different regulatory processes and independent scientists evaluating it, it should give people confidence that actually it has been rigorously looked at by a number of countries, a number of regulators, and a number of scientists. But yeah, the next 6 to 8 weeks, I tell people to be careful. I mean, you don't want to get infected now in the last stretch, and you don't want to infect others. And so I think my message to kind of older people is you've held off for 10 months. So what's another few months till you get your place in the queue to get the vaccine? And for younger people, you don't want to be responsible for infecting anyone. And there's so much we can do safely. I mean, again, 8 months ago, we didn't understand where the virus transmitted, how it transmitted, what was safe. Now we know, get outside for a walk, you're really unlikely to be infected. See people outside, ventilate your homes. The one thing people don't necessarily know about this is the aerosol dimension. I think that was something that scientists were slow to, which is, we focus a lot on like clean your hands and sit 2 meters away. But the truth is, if someone is infectious and is inside at your dining table, and even if they're across the room, you're probably going to get infected. So once you enter someone's home and their kind of living arrangements, there's not much you can do to stop yourself becoming infected if they are. And this is why you have in the States Thanksgiving parties where 24 people become infected over the course of dinner, even if they're sitting on opposite sides of the table. So that would be like my message to people, to understand a bit about how it transmits, because then you can make decisions and choices of how you want to do the holidays in a safer way.
Debbie, thank you very much. And Ben and Debbie, I mean, I can only imagine the two of you, the demands on your time must be absolutely ridiculous. So we really appreciate you making the time. And I think everyone on the call and then who watches on the website will really, really value it. We are going to be following up on Monday, obviously, on what happens on Brexit. Tony and I will be talking then. There's a webinar with Robert Jenrick and Lloyd's Banking Group on the whole levelling up agenda on Monday. I suspect that Rob Jenrick, as a member of the Cabinet, will have more to talk about than just levelling up come Monday morning, but we'll be looking forward to seeing him then. And Tony, just to sort of actually pass back to you finally, it's a big thought, isn't it, the idea of business that in our lifetimes has really taken on responsibility for training and education and skills, beginning to think about what you talk about, wellness in terms of physical and mental health. Something significant is changing, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I've used the phrase before. It's a very grand phrase, business at the service of the nation, or business in the national interest. It's really proving true. It's not quite the war, I think I said on Monday, but it's as close as our generation has got to. And look, I think we're seeing the best of business, frankly, which is trying to support society, employees, customers, suppliers, partners in real solidarity to get through this challenge. And what an inspiring session from Ben and Debbie today. Really enjoyed it.
Tony Danker, thank you very much. Debbie Schreeder, Ben Osborne, thanks so much, and thank you all for joining us. Have a good couple of days and a good weekend too. All the best. Thanks.